Today, we're going to be looking at some Bitcoin success stories.
Yeah, some pretty incredible journeys, and we've got some great material to work with today.
All right, so let's jump right in and start with someone who represents that classic early adopter story.
Yeah.
Someone who was there when Bitcoin was practically worthless.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll call him Mr. Smith for anonymity's sake. He was a software engineer. Back in 2010, Bitcoin was barely on anyone's radar, right?
Yeah, hardly anyone was talking about it back then.
Exactly. It was trading for 15 cents a coin?
Yeah, something like that.
Crazy. So, Mr. Smith, being tech savvy, decided to invest $3,000. It's not a huge amount, but
Yeah.
what's mind-blowing is that this tiny investment got him almost 20,000 Bitcoins. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Seriously, though, the key takeaway here isn't just luck or timing. It's about vision.
Right.
Seeing the potential before everyone else.
Yeah, long-term vision.
Exactly. Fast forward a few years, and Bitcoin starts making headlines. Prices are going through the roof. And Mr. Smith decides to cash out a portion of his holdings.
Smart move.
That small $3,000 investment turned into a cool $2.3 million.
No way.
Yeah, he quit his job, and now he's living the dream, traveling the world, first-class flights, 5-star restaurants.
I even read that his girlfriend says he can't stop talking about Bitcoin.
Well, can you blame him?
Not at all. I mean, who wouldn't be excited after turning a few $1,000s into millions?
Yeah.
But let's move on to a story that might resonate with a lot of our listeners.
Sure.
The story of Daniel Crocker. Back in 2012, he was working as an apprentice and decided to dip his toes into the world of Bitcoin.
Okay, I'm listening.
Now, what's relatable about Daniel's story is that he started small. He didn't have a fortune to invest.
Right.
But he consistently bought Bitcoin over time, just little by little.
Smart strategy.
He held on to it for 8 years.
Wow.
And guess what? He was able to sell enough to cover half the deposit on his first house.
That's incredible.
Achieving a major life goal like home ownership, thanks to Bitcoin, shows you don't have to be a millionaire to benefit from this. This new financial landscape.
Definitely a powerful example.
Okay, now get this. Our next story is about a teenager who made a bet with his parents that if he became a millionaire by 18, he wouldn't have to go to college.
Oh, wow. What a story.
Yeah, this is Eric Finman. He was only 12 years old when he invested $1,000 in Bitcoin. Bitcoin was worth around $10 a coin back then.
Okay.
By 18, Eric had become a millionaire, thanks to Bitcoin's growth. He even sold his education company. It was called Bowtangle for 300 Bitcoins.
That's crazy. He was a teenager running a company.
And how did he celebrate?
Let me guess. Something extravagant.
You got it.
Yeah.
He bought himself an Audi R8. This story is like something out of a movie. But it also shows how younger generations view wealth and success differently. They're not afraid to take risks, and they're challenging the traditional path.
Absolutely. They're redefining success on their own terms.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit now and talk about someone with a different perspective. Heather Delaney. She's a business professional who sees Bitcoin as a key part of her long-term financial strategy. She's been steadily investing in Bitcoin as part of her pension plan.
Interesting. So she's thinking long-term retirement planning.
Exactly. What's interesting about her approach is that she's unfazed by the short-term price fluctuations. She gets that Bitcoin can be volatile, but she sees it as a way to secure her financial future, in the long run.
It's like a digital safety net.
Yeah, she's not looking for a quick buck. She's thinking decades ahead. It's a completely different mindset compared to someone like Mr. Smith, who cashed out for immediate gains.
Two different approaches, but both rooted in a belief in Bitcoin's potential.
Okay, before we move on to one of the biggest names in the Bitcoin world, let's talk about Kane Ellis. He's an Australian entrepreneur who started mining Bitcoin way back in 2010.
Mining back then must have been pretty different.
Oh, yeah, it was the Wild West of Bitcoin, when it was worth like $1.60.
Wow.
He actually sold some of his Bitcoin to buy a McDonald's meal.
You're kidding?
Nope, a McDonald's meal. It's funny now, but I bet he wishes he had that Bitcoin back.
I'll say it's amazing how much our perception of value has changed.
Totally. He still managed to buy a bright yellow Maserati a few years later, though.
Not bad.
But speaking of early adopters who made bold moves, let's talk about Michael Saylor, the CEO of MicroStrategy. He went all in on Bitcoin, but on a corporate level.
Okay, this should be good.
This is where things get really interesting. Saylor's journey with Bitcoin is quite a story. He started as a skeptic. He even tweeted back in 2013 that Bitcoin's days were numbered.
Wow, and now look at him.
Right. Something definitely changed his mind. By 2020, he was a full-blown Bitcoin advocate. He even compared it to a swarm of cyber hornets serving the goddess of wisdom. Not your typical CEO talk.
Definitely not.
But why the dramatic shift? Well, Saylor believed that holding cash, especially with low interest rates and rising inflation, was a losing game. He saw Bitcoin as a superior store of value, like a digital gold. And he was determined to act on that belief.
So he put his money where his mouth was.
He didn't just dip his toes in the water, he dove headfirst. In August 2020, MicroStrategy made its first big Bitcoin purchase, $250 million worth. This wasn't just a side bet. It was a strategic decision to make Bitcoin a core part of the company's treasury reserve.
That's a bold move.
And it's just the beginning. MicroStrategy continued to buy Bitcoin, and as of mid-2024, they hold over 226,000 Bitcoins.
That's one of the largest publicly traded holdings of Bitcoin in the world.
It's a huge gamble. Saylor is essentially betting his company's future on Bitcoin. Some might call him a visionary, others might say he's reckless.
It's definitely sparked a lot of debate. So we've established that Michael Saylor went all in on Bitcoin, turning MicroStrategy into a Bitcoin buying machine.
But how did he actually finance those massive purchases? I mean, we're talking billions of dollars here. It's not like he was just using the company's petty cash.
Right. It required some creative financial maneuvering. One method he used was issuing convertible notes and bonds.
Okay, hold on a sec. For those of us who aren't Wall Street wizards, can you break down what convertible notes are?
Sure. In simple terms, convertible notes are like loans that can be converted into equity, which in this case would be MicroStrategy stock. It's a way for companies to raise capital by tapping into investor interest in both the company itself and the underlying asset, in this case, Bitcoin.
So Saylor essentially found a way to leverage the growing enthusiasm for Bitcoin to fund MicroStrategy's purchases. Pretty ingenious,
Yeah.
but also incredibly risky, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It was a gamble, both for MicroStrategy and the investors who bought those notes and bonds. If Bitcoin's price crashed, MicroStrategy could have been left with a mountain of debt and a severely devalued asset.
And on the flip side, if Bitcoin continued to climb, both MicroStrategy and its investors stood to make a fortune. It's a classic high-risk, high-reward scenario.
Exactly. Saylor was essentially betting that Bitcoin's long-term potential would outweigh the risks associated with its volatility. And as we know, Bitcoin's price has experienced some wild swings over the years.
Which leads to another point. Saylor's strategy attracted a lot of scrutiny. There were plenty of critics who argued that he was putting MicroStrategy in a precarious position. Did any of these concerns hold water?
Well, some critics raised valid points. There were concerns about the sustainability of such a concentrated debt on a single asset, especially one as volatile as Bitcoin. What if Bitcoin's price plummeted? What would that mean for MicroStrategy's financial stability and its shareholders?
It's a lot of pressure to put on one asset, even if you believe in its long-term potential. And let's not forget about the shareholders. They're the ones who ultimately bear the risk.
That's right. Saylor's Bitcoin strategy definitely divided opinions among MicroStrategy's shareholders. Some were thrilled with the potential upside, while others were understandably anxious about the potential downside.
So how did Saylor navigate this pushback from shareholders who weren't as bullish on Bitcoin as he was?
Interestingly, Saylor anticipated this resistance. Back in 2020, before he really went all in on Bitcoin, he made a strategic move. He offered to buy back shares from any shareholders who were uncomfortable with the Bitcoin strategy.
So he basically gave them a chance to cash out before the big Bitcoin purchases began.
Yeah.
It was like saying, if you're not with me on this Bitcoin journey, here's your exit.
Exactly. This move allowed him to consolidate support among shareholders who believed in his vision and mitigate potential backlash from those who didn't share his enthusiasm.
It's a fascinating glimpse into his leadership style. He was determined to pursue his Bitcoin strategy. But he also recognized the importance of addressing shareholder concerns and providing an alternative for those who weren't on board.
It was a calculated risk, and so far it seems to have paid off. But it raises some broader questions about the role of Bitcoin in the corporate world. Could Saylor's approach become a blueprint for other companies? Or is he an outlier, a maverick who's taking a gamble that most wouldn't dare to follow?
Those are questions we'll explore further as we examine the long-term implications of Saylor's strategy. But before we get into that, let's shift gears and revisit those individual success stories.
It's fascinating to compare and contrast these different approaches to Bitcoin. We have individuals like Mr. Smith who cashed out for immediate gains, and then we have those like Heather Delaney who see it as a long-term investment strategy.
And then there's Michael Saylor, who's not just investing his own money, but using a publicly traded company as a vehicle to execute his Bitcoin vision. It's a whole different level of risk and reward.
It certainly is. And all these stories, while unique in their details, point to a fundamental shift in how we view money value and the future of finance. But let's delve back into those individual stories for a moment.
Right. Because while Saylor's story is captivating, it's important to remember that Bitcoin's impact extends far beyond the corporate world. Let's go back to those early adopters like Mr. Smith and Daniel Crocker who were there at the very beginning.
Their stories, in a way, mirror Saylor's journey. They all recognized an opportunity that others missed and were willing to embrace the inherent risks associated with a new and unproven technology.
They were pioneers navigating uncharted territory. And in doing so, they not only achieved financial success, but also helped shape the future of Bitcoin.
Their stories are a testament to the power of early adoption, long-term vision, and a belief in the transformative potential of disruptive technologies. But it's also important to remember that not every story ends in triumph.
Right. We talked about Kane Ellis and his McDonald's meal regret. It's a lighthearted reminder that even in the world of Bitcoin, there are missteps and missed opportunities.
It humanizes the experience, reminding us that even savvy investors can make decisions they might regret later. But his story also underscores the incredible growth potential of Bitcoin. Imagine selling a few Bitcoins for a burger today. The thought alone is enough to make anyone's head spin.
It's a potent reminder of how much Bitcoin has evolved since those early days and how difficult it was to predict its meteoric rise. But let's not dwell too much on the past. Let's bring this back to the present and explore the broader implications of Bitcoin's evolution.
All right, so we've seen the individual stories, the corporate maneuvers, and the what-if moments. But what does it all mean? What lessons can we learn from these diverse experiences?
That's the million-dollar question, or should we say the Bitcoin question? What are the key takeaways that our listener can apply to their own understanding of this rapidly evolving financial landscape?
That's what we'll unpack in the final part of Stay With Us.
Okay, so we've explored all these Bitcoin success stories from individual investors taking a chance to a corporate CEO making a huge bet. What can we actually learn from all this?
You know, it's interesting. Despite their differences, all these stories have some things in common, some real insights for anyone who's interested in Bitcoin or even just the future of finance.
Yeah, let's break it down. What are those common threads?
Well, first, we saw the importance of getting in early. Like those who got into Bitcoin when it was still under the radar, they saw the biggest gains.
Right, those early adopters. They had the vision to see the potential before it was obvious, and the guts to take the risk.
Exactly. It wasn't about luck. It was about recognizing a disruptive technology before it became mainstream. And that leads us to the second common thread, this belief that Bitcoin is a good store of value, like we talked about with Michael Saylor.
Yeah, that was a big part of his reasoning.
Saylor argues that Bitcoin is actually better than traditional assets like gold or regular money, because it's limited and decentralized. It's a hedge against things like inflation and economic uncertainty.
So it's not just about making a quick profit. It's about protecting your savings in the long run.
Exactly. And that brings us to the third common thread, thinking long term. The people who really made bank with Bitcoin weren't the ones trying to time the market. They were the ones who held on for years.
Right, like Mr. Smith, who waited years before cashing out, and Daniel Crocker, who patiently held his Bitcoin for 8 years before buying a house. They weren't chasing those quick wins.
They were playing the long game. And that takes resilience. Because the Bitcoin market is a roller coaster. It can really test your nerves.
Which leads us to the final thing they all had in common. They were willing to embrace risk.
Absolutely. Especially in those early days, investing in Bitcoin was a gamble. There was no guarantee it would succeed.
Even today, it's still considered risky.
Yeah.
People need to be ready for those price swings.
Yep. So there you have it. Early adoption, a belief in Bitcoin as a store of value, a long-term outlook, and a willingness to embrace risk. Those are the things that set apart the people who profited from Bitcoin.
But these stories are about more than just money. They show the human side of investing, too. The emotions, the worries, the wins that come with navigating this crazy new market.
Yeah, like when we heard about Mr. Smith's girlfriend joking about his obsession with Bitcoin, or Eric Finman basically saying no thanks to college, or Michael Saylor making this wild bet on a digital future. These stories remind us that Bitcoin is about people. It's about their beliefs and their dreams.
It's not just numbers and charts. It's about real lives being changed.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting. Bitcoin is more than just a technology or an investment. It's a cultural phenomenon. It's changing how we think about money and value and the future of finance.
So as we wrap up, we really want you to think about these stories and what you can take away from them. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just curious about Bitcoin, knowledge is key. The more you know, the better prepared you'll be to make smart decisions about your financial future.
And remember, this is just the start. The Bitcoin story is still unfolding. We're only just beginning to see its impact. So stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay open to the possibilities.
Who knows? Maybe one day we'll be talking about your Bitcoin success story. Thanks for listening.